watched last year's with the year before's crossover. And I'm like, I don't know if this helps inform me in any which way. You know, there's so much going on. It's so crazy. But, you know, just like kind of soaking in the tone and then just kind of like finding my own way with it. Hi, my name is Osric Chau. I'm an actor, and for Crisis on Infinite Earths, I played Ryan Choi, who is the paragon of humanity. And in the comics, some of you may know, some of you might not, Ryan Choi actually takes over the mantle of the Atom. So Ray Palmer, he's Ray Palmer's successor.
I think we did it. I think we fixed it.
Guys, we already know all this.
It's buffering, so maybe a little patience.
Huh, why am I not surprised?
That's new.
Who the hell is that guy?
Dr. Ryan Choi, physics professor at Ivytown University on our Earth.
Well, I guess we know our next stop. Right, Ralph?
Ivytown. It's my old stomping grounds. Let's go.
With all the paragons identified, our next priority is determining how to stop the antimatter wave.
I've actually heard that there was a story that before you got casted as Ryan, that you and your roommates were actually, one of your roommates was looking through old comic books and old superheroes and determining what superhero you could be. How did that come about, of that conversation of like, oh, you know, like, let's find a superhero that you could play?
I mean, it wasn't really that like meticulous in terms of like what it was, but it was this conversation that we had ongoing, like, oh, like, you know, now that superheroes were like starting to be a thing, and, you know, both of us were pretty big comic book geeks, and I mean, he was a major one. His name's Eric Sturpey. He's a video game writer now, and Eric just had this wealth of knowledge in the comic book world. And one day he just like came back from the comic book store, and he just like plops down this comic on my desk, and he's like, dude, Ryan Choi. And I'm like, oh, what's this Ryan Choi? And then he just like gave me the whole rundown on Ryan Choi. I ended up buying the entire collection that was available at the time, and we just started like throwing ideas like, man, this character, there's so much to him, and his story would be such a fun TV show. And so we actually started developing a TV show for Ryan. Like, yeah, this is years ago, like 2011, I would want to say. And we approached like Gail Simone, who was like super supportive of it. And I met her at, I think it was Emerald City Comic Con. I met her. She was like, oh my God, you are Ryan. And we just kind of like started this friendship online, and she has since like asked me if she could use my name and likeness, and she put me in a Red Sonja comic, which was super cool. I think it's Osric the Magnificent. He's like this unbeaten swordsman until Red Sonja comes in. And yeah, it's been such a wild ride. And so when we finally like got a chance to pitch it, CW, or Warner Brothers, I can't remember, but they're like, we're already developing something with the Atom, so we can't actually look at it. We can't even look. And I'm like, well, there goes that chapter of my life. And I was ready to move on. Sure enough, that show ended up being Legends of Tomorrow, and now the door is kind of opened back up. So who knows where it might be, but I still feel really strongly about Ryan Choi as a character. Whether or not I play him, honestly, I think it's a story worth telling. And so even if they decide to like recast me and put another amazing actor up there, I would be very happy for just the opportunity for Ryan's story to get told. I think it's one that's worth telling for sure.
Obviously, you ended up getting the part. When you went to audition for Ryan, how did that audition process go when they asked you to come in and read for him?
Oh, so you came in to read, well, I can't remember the name, but it was like Kyle something character. And knowing that it was like, you know, a DC thing, I was actually running my lines with Eric. And halfway through we're just trying to figure out who it was. He's like, dude, this might be Ryan. I'm like, oh my God, it makes sense. It's Ryan. And so in the audition, like that's how I prepared my audition, like thinking it's Ryan. And in the audition, I did my scenes, felt really good about it. And at the end, I'm like, is this Ryan Choi? And you could just see the room kind of like freeze up. They're like, who told you? I'm like, all right, never mind. Got like that answered my question. Turned out it was, and it totally caught him off guard. But yeah, it just made sense that it was Ryan. So I nailed that one, and it was a pretty good feeling. It's just gonna shift the power dynamic in an audition room.
I said this in my last Avengers Endgame video where I talked about how Avengers Endgame changed my life, and I think what I said in that video was that it's the appeal of superheroes, because superheroes really inhabit a lot of qualities that we would like to see in real people in the real world, but we don't see that because, if I'm being perfectly honest, we're living in a world of just people with a lot of anger and hate, and people who choose to cause harm on other people. And I think when we look at superheroes, we see those qualities that would kind of make you go like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I actually knew people who actually inhabited all those qualities? I think Crisis on Infinite Earths really put those qualities on the forefront, because you have superheroes that are dealing with a massive threat that seems pretty much hopeless, and then you put it in a situation of where you would have to rely on those qualities in order to survive. So for the longest time, I knew that DC was interested in adapting Crisis on Infinite Earths. The problem being is that Crisis is such a massive story, the same way that Infinity War and Endgame are big storylines as far as their comic book counterparts go. And the problem is that unlike Marvel, who kind of have an advantage because they kind of started building a cinematic universe in order to lead into those movies, Crisis on Infinite Earths, they didn't really have the right platform or the right content to kind of launch it off of. I mean, you could even look at the current DC extended universe, where they try to do movies focused on DC superheroes, but then you could see from that side that they didn't handle it very well because they tried to leap into the big, massive comic book storylines before they were even ready to, because they didn't focus on the smaller scale stories first. So because of that, I kind of just went on to accept the fact that they might not be able to do it because it would require a much larger budget, a lot of extra time to film it, which is something that a TV production schedule typically can't do. And when your movie universe is not well built enough and you're not able to adapt that storyline, it becomes very problematic to where you're like, okay, I guess you kind of have to come to terms with the fact that this storyline may never happen. However, it wasn't until the DC shows, more particularly when the shows Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, Legends of Tomorrow came out on the CW kind of year after year, and started off doing small scale crossover episodes where they were just kind of like a few characters would hop into each other's shows, to then slowly adding more episodes to the point where the CW kind of said, okay, we'll let you do Crisis on Infinite Earths because you were able to slowly build up this universe. It really brought a smile to my face in particular, because it was a comic book storyline I was really excited to see adapt during a time when I felt like it wasn't possible to adapt it because production-wise it didn't seem realistic to adapt it. So of course I can't talk about any of your work in Crisis without mentioning Supernatural, where you played Kevin Tran, and probably the most recognizable character you're known for. But I've heard that you almost didn't audition for the role because there was another project that you were signed on for, and I heard there was some complications with that. Like, what was up with that?
That was the whole thing. I was doing a week in Vancouver. I was on my way to LA for a callback for a really big pilot for a series regular. And so I was just saying hi to my parents. I was coming from China. And the day that I was supposed to leave, I got an audition. And my agent's like, this is a director producer session, you should go. So I looked into flights and it was like $600. I'm like, oh, man, like, can I just send a tape or something? Like, I'm already going to LA for a much bigger role. Why would I, spend $600 on this thing? And he's like, yeah, like these just don't come around that often. Like, you should really consider doing it. And so I just took my agent's advice, spent $600 on an audition, and all of a sudden it was the most expensive audition I'd ever done. And that was like almost all of the money that I had in my account at the time. And so I just rehearsed that so heavily that by the time it came around, I just did it, felt really good about it. Ben Edlund was in the room. And I was a big fan of The Tick as well, so that was really cool. And then I flew to LA, did that audition, and then on Saturday I got offers for both roles. And I was told that I could only do one because of scheduling. And I had to let Supernatural know by Monday if I was gonna take it or not. And then the other one, if I were to wait for it, I wouldn't know officially till Wednesday because I still had to get network tested and studio tested. So there was like a chance that I wouldn't get anything. And so it was one of those moments where I'm like, okay, do I go for the big fish or do I just like go for the sure thing? I went for the big fish. I'm like, if I've done it one time, I can do it again. And so I just went for the big one. And then they realized it was the same business affairs person. They didn't want to lose an actor to their own show. So like, they're like, okay, we're going to make it work. And the other one didn't end up going through. So originally having turned down Supernatural, I was really lucky and thankful that it worked out. And the rest is history.
Just for me personally, because I've never actually mentioned this to anyone before, but I remember that the very first episode you were in, maybe like the first few minutes into the episode, I actually was not a fan of your character. And primarily because Kevin seemed a little too stereotypical, but it wasn't until like halfway through the episode that he warmed up to me. And then by the next season, I was like fully on board. I'm just curious if you had any sort of similar reaction when you first read Kevin in the script, if you had any sort of similar reaction.
100%. I mean, part of my apprehension with auditioning for him and spending that money to audition for him was he was such a stereotypical character. But knowing that it was like, at the time it was a 3-episode arc and he was supposed to die on the last episode of that season, it seemed like, okay, like maybe they'll do something cool with this character despite like that. So unless you address those things, they're still gonna be there. And so what I loved about Kevin was that we got to see the stereotype. We got to see all of the assumptions that people might make of this character. I have a problem now, but like certainly growing up, there was always a chip on my shoulder in terms of like what was expected of me or what I should expect in pretty much doing anything in my life or career. And I hated that. I hated feeling like I was limited by my skin color or my race or any of those things that I just couldn't control or I shouldn't want to control. And so part of my motivation, my purpose for doing everything that I was doing was that I just didn't want the next kid growing up in North America to feel the same ways that I did growing up. And because I hated it. And it was super weird to have all of these like moments of like waking up one day and realizing like, oh, for my 10th birthday, I made a wish. I made a wish to be white someday. And that seemed so normal back then, but now it's like really weird to think about, right? And you start to wonder why. And it's like, well, because all of the cool characters that we used to see on TV and movies were all white guys. And like even on the playground, I wasn't able to pretend to be those characters because it didn't make sense. And I completely agreed with the other kids because it didn't make sense, right? So it was just like such a weird thing to think about. And I'm like, man, I wonder how many like millions of people have limited themselves. Is helping people attain whatever it is that they want to attain, because I think anything is possible if you love it, and seeing people doing what they love is one of my favorite things.
So clearly, like, Asian representation in media has gotten better over the years. I mean, there's still a lot of work to do. I mean, it's gotten better, but there still is a lack of it, especially in the superhero genre. I remember when you first posted on your Instagram that when you first got cast as Ryan, you said, and I quote, that you said that this casting is, quote, not your victory, but just another step in a much larger movement. What did you mean by that when you said that?
Because yeah, that is just one thing. If that was the only thing that happened, like, it's not enough, right? Simu getting to play Shang-Chi, if that is all that our community gets, that's not enough. If either of us being cast in these roles do not open the doors for other people to get cast in other roles, like, what have we really done? Then it's just self-serving, right? So, and I mean, and this is just one, like, it's pretty much all minorities. We're all severely underrepresented based off of the amount of people that are actually in the population. You know, you have to pick your own battles though. Like, the Asian representation thing is certainly the one I grew up with, the one that makes the most sense for me to push. So that's why I push it. But you can't do it by yourself, and you succeeding does not equate to your community succeeding, right? For Asians, one of the things that we get a lot is, like, once you make it, you become white passing, and all of a sudden they kind of like bring you into their community, and then it's like, okay, well, there's the Asian community, and then there's this one person who's succeeded, right? That was an attitude that, if not like outspoken, was, that's how people acted. It's like, okay, well, you got a couple that they're the exceptions to the rule, and then you have the rest, right? And I hate that. You know, we are a community. We are a big, getting more vocal community, and we are hungry for our own stories to be seen.
Dr. Palmer, who are these people?
We are superheroes, and Ryan, we need your help.
Sure, Dr. Palmer. Good one. Hey, next you're gonna tell me I've been nominated for the Breakthrough Prize in Fundamental Physics?
Okay, we don't have time for this.
Seeing is believing, right?
Tissue. You're elongated man? Are you superheroes too?
I know this sounds cuckoo, pal, but you're what's called the Paragon, which is a fancy word for saying we need your help to save the universe. Dr. Choi.
If the world's ending, I need to go home.
Please, Ryan, we really need your help.
No, you don't. I'm no hero. I'm a husband. And if this is the end, I have to be with my wife and kid. I'm sorry.
Did you ever get a chance to read the original Crisis on Infinite Earths comics? And if not, were you aware that it was basically DC's version of like Marvel's like Infinity War and Endgame as far as the scope goes?
I was aware. So once my casting was announced, another friend, Shanku, who actually had a copy of the book, or he might have actually purchased it. He just bought that and he like loaned it to me for a bit. So I just glanced through it. It's so thick, I didn't have time to read it through. But yeah, I was aware of how monumental of an occasion that was in the DC world. And, you know, having filmed it, there's certain like moments I'm like, oh, this is that panel. Oh, this is that panel. So that was pretty cool too. So I have to thank my buddy Sean for that.
So in the comics, anybody who knows Ryan Choi knows that he takes over the mantle of the Atom after Ray Palmer. However, in the Crisis crossover, we didn't get to see him wear a suit. Was there any particular reason why he doesn't get a suit, and were you possibly fitted for a suit when the decision wasn't made yet?
No, well, Ryan is the paragon of humanity, for one. So he has to be the most human of humans, if anything, right? So never got fitted for a suit. There was one draft of the script that I got really excited for, but at the end of the Crisis, you know, they have that table with all the chairs. Well, one of those chairs had the Atom symbol on, and that was cool. That did not make the cut, unfortunately. So I think they had one chair too many. But I think this also kind of opens it up to more of an origin story for Ryan and the Atom, which is kind of what his whole thing starts off as anyway. So I would rather go that direction rather than just like all of a sudden like jump in. Like you can't really do that. Ray Palmer was there, but now that Ray's kind of said his goodbye, just like in the comics.
Normally, the DC shows, when they film their crossovers, it's usually really difficult to film because you're working with a TV schedule, along with the fact that you're trying to cram in multiple hours of TV, as opposed to just making a movie. What did the schedule of filming Crisis feel like when it was kind of like you had to hop on from one show to the other? Like one day you
No, it has nothing to do with the TV scheduling. It's the fact that they're scheduling like, was it 5 different shows at the same time? Right, so you're trying to get the same actors from all of these 5 different shows to be in all of the shows, and you're filming it in the span of 2 months, right? So 2 months, normally it's 8 days an episode, so 8 times 5 is 40 days, and then minus the weekends. Yeah, so you get a couple of days of leeway, but essentially you're trying to film all of those shows at the same time concurrently. And what ends up happening is that every single one of those heroes have two body doubles, like one normal body double, one photo double, one stunt double. And so sometimes they need to be on 3 different sets on the same day, right? So it becomes a logistical nightmare for the first ADs who have to schedule everyone. And can you imagine if one person's schedule changes even a little bit, like it affects everything. So I think just for the crossovers, they have to hire 2 special first ADs to come in and help organize everything, just because it's such a logistical nightmare. So I don't think they can go bigger than that because they barely pulled this one off. But I mean,
So there was also a point where you said in a previous interview where you said that being a part of Crisis was just like being at Comic-Con, but considering that you've been to a lot of cons, especially the Supernatural cons, how did it differ from being on the Crisis set as opposed to being like at Comic-Con where you see cosplayers cosplaying as like Superman or whatever?
I mean, it felt exactly like that because, you know, everyone was in costume and they all had like their costumers, like their handlers trying to fix things up because things are like falling apart or whatever. I'm like, wow, this is like exactly like Comic-Con, except like everyone in costume here is like, you know, like $100,000 suits, right? Like they're so expensive and they like have this massive team around them. But everyone was just playing dress up. Like that's what acting is. That's what filmmaking is. And so for everyone to be a comic book character, it was just so weirdly surreal. And like if I just like closed my eyes and like blanked out for a second and I opened them, like I would feel like I was at Comic-Con because like there was nothing that dissimilar. Like you go to Comic-Con and sometimes the costumes are even better than what they have. So like what's different? I mean, I guess all the like the video cameras as opposed to photo cameras, but the set maybe. But it was very much like a Comic-Con. And then you'd have like everyone like running around like, can we take a photo? Can we take a photo? I'm like, ah, this is exactly like Comic-Con.
I think what calls out to me about Crisis on Infinite Earths personally is this sense of urgency. So it's not a particular scene in this crossover that I particularly like. It's really about the fact that within this entire story, there's this sense of urgency. You know, you're on a ticking time bomb. You're fighting the clock. And in this crossover, a lot of what the storyline inhabits is basically your main villain, the Anti-Monitor, destroying every universe and every Earth in existence. And as he consumes every other Earth, you know at the end he's going to come for your Earth. So you got to make sure you get all of these tasks done. You know, you need to gather your 7 Paragons. You need to save as many as people as possible before the time runs out. And I think this sense of urgency is what calls out to me the most about this story, because I think just as people, but you know you can't because the antimatter wave is coming and it's going to annihilate anything that it touches. So this sense of urgency, I think, is what calls to me the most about this entire crossover. Did what I probably consider one of the coolest scenes ever in the Arrowverse.
wish I could have done more. Like coming from a martial arts background and like knowing all the stunt guys on that show already, because it's Vancouver, it's my home. It was hard for me not to do stuff, but I mean, it was cool to be a part of for sure. I just wish.
So now that you got to be a part of DC in this big crossover, I know for a fact that you are more of a Marvel fan than a DC fan. If the opportunity came about, if it was the other way around in Marvel, who would you want to play?
Okay, if it's Marvel, Amadeus Cho. Love the totally awesome Hulk. I hope they do it at some point, and whoever plays Amadeus, I'll be so excited for them because it's just an awesome property. I mean, that being said, like honestly, like Ryan Choi, I just loved so much, and when she kind of came off of that project, it like the drop in quality was very noticeable, and I just yeah, I want to bring that Ryan Choi to life, and so I think that's going to be a goal of mine for a while. Whether or not I'm successful, I guess we'll wait and see. But that's certainly something that I have to try. I can't not try.
I thought it'd be kind of fun to do like a little, if I would list off your previous co-stars from other projects you've worked on, and just if you give them like a little yearbook superlative.
Oh, okay. I'll try.
All right. So first we got Melissa Benoist.
Best undergrad role model. That was actually what I was voted in high school. I think she deserves it.
Oh wow. John Cryer.
John Cryer. Oh, John Cryer, most outspoken.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Follow on Twitter about it.
David Harewood.
David Harewood, biggest fanboy.
Wouldn't have expected that one. Grant Gustin.
Grant Gustin. I guess most unexpected. Like he just surprised me on so many fronts. I loved getting to hang out with Grant. Most unexpected for me. Most surprising, I guess.
All right. Candace Patton.
Candace Patton. Oh, she was like most business oriented. Like she was just like so on top of everything, like so efficient. Yeah, it was great.
Wow. Stephen Amell.
Stephen Amell. Most relaxed, because it was his last day on like the entire series, so he was like just so happy-go-lucky on his last day. I mean, it was his last day, so I only have the last day experience, I feel like.
All right. Brandon Routh.
Brandon Routh. Most random factoids.
Really? Okay. Ruby Rose.
Ruby Rose. Most stylish.
All right, I can see that. Katie Lotz.
Kate Lotz. Just the coolest girl. She was. I guess she would get the funniest, the jokester.
Cress Williams.
Cress. Cress. I mean, he's just the coolest. He's such a cool dude. I could just best voice. He's just got this like nice resonant voice that just like carries. I could listen to him all day.
LaMonica Garrett.
LaMonica Garrett. Oh, actually, no, he's the biggest fanboy. Who am I kidding? Sorry. LaMonica Garrett is the biggest fanboy. Yeah. LaMonica is the one that has read like all the comics, I believe.
Simu Liu.
Simu. Oh man, he's just so buff now. The buffest, I guess.
I mean, you're not wrong there.
He's been working out like crazy. Yeah, he's so like. Last time I saw him, like Jesus, you're like a brick wall now.
God. Jensen Ackles.
Jensen Ackles. I guess he's the most unsuspecting prankster. He'll do things, but he'll like take credit for it at like the very last second if he does. Like he'll just like, because you don't expect it from him, but he does.
Jared Padalecki.
He's human puppy.
I would have thought it would have been most likely to get injured.
I mean that too.
Misha Collins.
Misha Collins, just the best dude.
All right. And of course, I saved the best for last. Mark Shepard.
That's everyone's first choice for a dinner date.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh yeah. Thank you for watching Sammy's video. If you liked it, hit the like button or be sure to subscribe.